Have you ever seen someone judged just because of the color of their skin, even in the most luxurious places, where money is supposed to erase all boundaries? Today's story begins aboard the first-class cabin of Astra Airlines on a flight from Dubai to Los Angeles. A black woman, Dr. Nyla Jefferson, CEO of one of the world's leading energy corporations, had just closed a multi-billion-dollar deal. All she wanted was a few quiet hours above the clouds. But what awaited her was a test of human dignity itself. The moment she boarded, the flight attendant, Ethan Vance, gave her a look that set all suspicion, judgment, and a hint of contempt. He served fine crystal glasses of wine to the white passengers, but handed her a plastic cup. Small gestures, soft words, yet they carried the full weight of systemic prejudice. What Ethan didn't know was that the woman he quietly looked down on was the very person who could change his future and the future of the airline he worked for. And in just a few minutes, the mask of professional politeness he wore would fall away, revealing a lesson the entire world would remember. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this story will shake your heart. Flight attendant embarrassed black CEO in first class minutes later. His career is over. Because this isn't just a story about racism, it's a story about how real justice is served, silently and with intelligence. Flight Astra Airlines AA709 from Dubai to Los Angeles lifted quietly off the runway under the desert sunset. Outside, the sky stretched out like a sheet of silver silk. Inside the first-class cabin, everything was wrapped in Italian leather, crystal glass, and the calm confidence of people who believed they belonged there. Dr. Nyla Jefferson sat in seat 2A, a black woman in her early 40s, posture straight, eyes focused. No flashy jewelry, only a vintage Patek Philippe watch her father had left her. She had just left Dubai after signing a multi-billion-dollar renewable energy deal, a project that would bring clean electricity to hundreds of African cities. To her, this wasn't just success. It was a promise to the children who still studied by the dim light of kerosene lamps, just as she once had. This flight was meant to be a small reward, a quiet space between boardrooms full of white men in suits. The lead flight attendant in first class was Ethan Vance, around 35, blonde hair, neatly pressed uniform, and a smile practiced like a formula. But that smile faltered the moment his eyes landed on Nyla, just for a second, long enough for anyone observant to notice. He glanced down at her e-ticket, then smiled again, thin as the surface of still water. "Good evening, Ms. Jefferson, seat 2A. Correct." His tone was even, but missing the warmth he'd just shown a white businessman in 2B. That man, Robert Mallory, a tech investor, was welcomed with a glass of Dom Perignon and a friendly question about his journey. Nyla, when she asked for water, received a plastic cup, no silver tray, no cool towel. She looked at the cup for a second, then simply nodded her thanks. Not because she didn't notice, but because she'd seen it all before. These small mistakes, these innocent oversights, all carried the same scent prejudice. Ethan continued his rounds. His voice turned bright again when he spoke to Robert. "Would you like me to show you tonight's wine list? Sir, we have a 2012 Chateau Margaux pairs beautifully with the main course." Robert chuckled, accepting the glass, glancing curiously toward Nyla, as if wondering who she was and how she had found her way into this space. Nyla opened her Kindle, scrolling through a few lines by Toni Morrison. "If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down." She smiled softly. It was her quiet ritual, a reminder to stay light, even when the world tried to press her down. Moments later, Ethan returned. his tone politely distant. "Excuse me, Ms. Jefferson, would you like to dine now? I think you'll enjoy the grilled chicken. It's light and easy." The words sounded courteous, but the way he emphasized grilled chicken while skipping over the finer dishes on the menu shifted the air between them. Neela looked at the menu, then lifted her gaze. "I'll have the lobster thermidor, with a glass of the same Chardonnay you just poured for the gentleman beside me. Thank you." Ethan froze for half a second, then pressed his lips together. "Of course, ma'am." He jotted it down, voice flat, without a closing pleasantry. As he walked away, Robert raised an eyebrow, half curious, half uncomfortable. Nyla stayed calm. She had long mastered the art of not reacting to invisible challenges. Not long after, an elderly man across the aisle, Justice Malcolm Drake, a retired judge, tilted his head and offered her a gentle smile. His eyes were steady, the kind that had seen too much injustice to still be surprised by it. He spoke softly, just enough for her to hear. "Sometimes our silence becomes the loudest voice in the room." Neela met his gaze with quiet gratitude. She understood his words weren't just about dinner. They were about the world. For the first stretch of the flight, everything remained outwardly calm. But beneath the polished surface, a small storm was forming between power, prejudice, and pride. Ethan, after several trips up and down the aisle, grew increasingly uneasy. He said nothing outright, but his eyes, his pauses, his gestures all spoke the same unspoken message. "You don't belong here." Nyla noticed, yet stayed silent, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. She knew the one wrong word could become a weapon against her. She'd seen it happen in boardrooms, at conferences, and now, 30,000 feet in the air. She took a deep breath, began typing a few notes on her laptop. The glow of the screen reflected off her face, calm and composed as still water. But that same light just minutes later would become the spark for an act that left the entire first-class cabin holding its breath. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane leveled off. In the quiet that followed, the only illumination came from Seat 2A and from the uneasy stare of Ethan Vance, a man about to cross the fragile line between service and judgment. The dim cabin light fell over first class like a thin layer of mist. Flight Astra Airlines. A709 drifted quietly through the Middle Eastern night, the steady hum of its engines pulsing like the breath of a giant steel creature. Dr. Nyla Jefferson still sat in Seat 2A, her fingers moving rhythmically over the keyboard. On her screen, the words "Helix Core Energy Expansion Report" reflected in her focused eyes. She worked as if unaware of the glances around her, but in truth, she sensed every one of them. Ethan Vance, the first-class attendant, appeared again with a tray of drinks. He stopped at Seat 2B, his voice bright and polished. "Mr. Mallory, may I offer you another glass of Dom Perignon? We're serving the 2012. It's quite rare." Robert Mallory smiled and nodded. Ethan poured the champagne into a crystal flute, tilting it slightly like a connoisseur, then set it on a silver tray. A white cloth draped over his wrist, every move choreographed by luxury service training. Then he turned toward the seat beside him, toward Nyla. His tone shifted shorter, flatter, stripped of warmth. "Would you like more water, ma'am?" Nyla looked up, polite smile steady. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." Ethan nodded curtly and walked off without another word. A few minutes later, he returned and set down a plastic cup of water. No tray, no napkin, no care. Just a quick, dismissive motion. Neela looked at the cup for a long moment, The blue glow from her screen illuminated her face. Calm, controlled, distant. She lifted the cup, took a slow sip, then placed it down as though it were made of crystal. No reaction, no emotion, only silence with the weight of long experience. Ethan moved down the aisle, adjusting blankets, smiling, bowing slightly, exchanging pleasantries. But each time he passed seat 2A, he avoided her gaze as if her eyes unsettled him. What is he afraid of across the aisle? Justice Malcolm Drake, the retired judge, studied him quietly. He had seen that look before in courtrooms on faces that believed they were maintaining order while quietly enforcing bias. Moments later, Nyla called softly, "Excuse me, may I have another glass of water? Please." Ethan paused. Didn't meet her eyes. Yes. One moment. That moment lasted 10 minutes. When he finally returned, he placed another plastic cup on her table. Nyla picked it up, nodded faintly, and whispered, "Thank you." No one else noticed except Justice Drake. He watched her restraint, then tilted his head slightly, eyes filled with both respect and sorrow. Some people fight with anger, others with silence. Meanwhile, Robert Mallory was still being doted on. "Are you traveling for business or leisure?" Sir Ethan asked warmly. "Oh, a bit of both. I've got a few meetings in Santa Monica." "Wonderful. You should try our special menu tonight. The lobster thermidor is a favorite among our VIP guests." Nyla heard every word, not out of curiosity, but because the contrast in tone was undeniable. That same friendly voice, the same enthusiasm, had disappeared entirely when it came to her. No one had to say she didn't belong. She'd been hearing it her whole life in every tone imaginable, in the finest of places. She looked out the window. The sky outside was endless and black, the lights of Dubai fading far behind. She took a slow breath and thought, "They don't know who I am, and that's fine." Ethan passed again, glancing at her quickly. Maybe he was waiting for irritation, for a complaint, something to justify correcting her. But Nyla just smiled, graceful, unbothered. She opened her email, reviewing her schedule in Los Angeles, where she'd be delivering a keynote on AI ethics and racial bias in global corporations. One of her talking points was unconscious bias. Now, she was witnessing it unfold live, 30,000 feet above the ground. Across the aisle, Justice Drake spoke calmly. "Mr. Vance, could I have an espresso? Please." "Of course, sir. Right away." When Ethan returned with the coffee, the judge spoke again, his tone slow and precise, like reading a statement on record. "Tell me, do you notice that this lady's cup of water looks a little different from ours?" Ethan froze, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Oh, I just grabbed what was convenient." "Sir?" Justice Drake nodded once. "Convenient. That's how prejudice usually begins, isn't it?" Silence settled over the cabin. Nyla lifted her gaze, her eyes meeting the judge's in quiet gratitude. She didn't need him to defend her, only to see her. Ethan pressed his lips together, swallowing his irritation, and retreated to the galley. When he came back, he carried her meal on a silver tray this time, with a linen napkin and a crystal glass. Nyla looked up, her voice calm and even. "Thank you. I appreciate the consistency. No sarcasm, no sting." But the sentence landed with surgical precision. Ethan had no reply. She ate slowly, every movement deliberate. The soft cabin light brushed her composed features, and for a moment, her calmness became the most commanding thing in the room. Robert Mallory, who'd been pretending to read his newspaper, finally turned toward her, What line of work are you in, Ms. Jefferson Energy Technology, she said evenly. Oh, interesting. I've invested in a few projects in Africa, but business there can get complicated. She smiled faintly. Yes, everything is complicated until someone decides to make it simple. Her voice wasn't loud or sharp, but it carried weight. Robert chuckled awkwardly, nodded, and turned back to his paper. For the rest of dinner, no one spoke. Justice Drake watched quietly. Ethan avoided their eyes, like a man aware he had just revealed something he should have kept hidden. Nyla leaned back, eyes closed. There was no anger on her face, only the exhaustion of someone who had witnessed this performance too many times. They call it customer service, she thought, but sometimes it's just a test to see how deep your patience goes. The plane continued slicing through the night. Everything seemed calm again, yet between seats 2A and 2B, a small crack had formed thin, but deep enough to lead to a real confrontation. Just a few hours later, after dinner was cleared away, Ethan would return his polite smile now forced, his voice tinged with sarcasm. And first class on flight AA709 was about to witness something no one expected, how a calm black woman could make an entire system look at itself in the mirror. The first-class cabin was bathed in soft amber light. The faint clinking of silverware echoed in the hush refined, rehearsed, and brittle. Dr. Nyla Jefferson sat upright, the cream-colored blanket draped neatly across her lap. Her laptop was closed now, dinner service beginning, but the moment Ethan Vance approached menu in hand, the air around her seemed to shift. He stopped before her, wearing that same thin smile, his voice even, stripped of warmth. "Good evening, Miss Jefferson. Tonight, we have grilled chicken breast, very light, easy on the stomach. I assume that'll be fine. Just grilled chicken, no other options offered. No mention of the chef's specials." His tone suggested not a question, but a boundary. Nyla looked up, her expression calm. "May I see the full menu? Please." Ethan hesitated. "Of course," he said finally, lowering his voice as he placed the leather-bound menu on her table. The embossed Astra Airlines logo glinted under the light. Lobster thermidor, black truffle risotto, Wagyu steak. Nyla traced a finger along the page, then said softly, "I'll have the lobster thermidor, with a glass of Chardonnay, preferably the same vintage Mr. Mallory is enjoying." Ethan's smile froze. His eyes flicked toward Robert Mallory, the white businessman seated beside her, as if to suggest she was copying his order. "I'm afraid," he said slowly, "there's only one lobster left, and it's already been taken." Nyla didn't speak, her gaze steady, unblinking, cut clean through the veneer of civility. Ethan lowered his eyes first. "Then I'll have the black truffle risotto," she said, her voice steady as glass. "Fine," he muttered, jotting it down before walking off without another word or smile. When he returned, he set the tray down with quick, mechanical precision. No introduction, no wine pairing, no acknowledgement. Moments later, he leaned toward Robert Mallory, voice coated in warmth. "Here you are, Sir Lobster Thermidor, finished with a cognac cream sauce and a touch of aged Parmesan. I'd recommend the white wine to complement it perfectly." Robert smiled, pleased. He either didn't notice or chose not to notice that the same dish had just been denied to the woman beside him. Across the aisle, Justice Malcolm Drake, the retired judge, watched silently. He took a sip of espresso, his eyes steady. He had presided over countless discrimination cases in his career. Yet somehow, this played out beneath chandeliers and leather felt sharper. Neela ate slowly, each bite weighted with more than flavor, not bitterness, not surprise, just the quiet taste of degradation polished, subtle, and intentional. When Ethan came to clear her plate, he asked, without meeting her eyes, "Everything all right with your meal, Ms. Jefferson?" She answered evenly, "Good. Not quite what the menu described, but good." Ethan froze a second too long, then forced a smile and turned away. Nyla felt no anger, at least not the kind that showed. Whatever fury once lived inside her had long been honed into control. What stung was not the act itself, but the message behind it. You're not equal. You don't belong here. Justice Drake leaned slightly toward her. "Are you all right, Miss Jefferson?" "I'm fine, sir." He nodded, then said quietly, "You know, sometimes a courtroom isn't the only place where justice is served. Some trials happen midair." Nyla's lips curved into a faint smile. "Maybe," she said softly, "but justice doesn't always arrive on schedule." Ethan returned once more, placing dessert in front of her, a small cake, no silver spoon, just a plastic utensil. Robert's dessert arrived on polished silver, with a glass of dessert wine. Nyla looked at the plastic spoon, then set it gently on the tray. "Could you please bring me the standard cutlery, Mr. Vance?" He turned back, tight-lipped. "Those are reserved for guests enjoying wine. Ma'am?" Nyla met his eyes, her tone still calm, but now edged with steel. "That's interesting. I was under the impression all guests in this cabin were treated equally." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. Words failed him. The silence that followed was heavy. Justice Drake watched without speaking. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence itself was the loudest testimony. Robert Mallory swallowed, shifting uneasily. "Ms. Jefferson," he said after a moment, voice low, "I hope I'm not intruding, but what line of work are you in?" Neela answered plainly, as if reciting a fact from memory. "I'm the CEO of Helix Core Energy. We just finalized a renewable energy agreement in Dubai." Robert froze mid-motion, the fork suspended in his hand. "You're the CEO?" "Yes." The word landed softly and with finality. The entire cabin fell silent. Ethan stood just a few feet away, his grip tightening around the tray, his eyes darting before he looked away. Dinner ended quietly. Nyla placed her napkin on the tray, graceful, deliberate, like closing a chapter. She turned toward the window, watching the faint glow of distant cities beneath the clouds. The anger inside her didn't flare. It smoldered steady, contained. She wasn't here to humiliate anyone. She only wished the world would stop being so comfortable with its coldness. Ethan came back to clear the dishes, careful not to meet her gaze. Justice Drake set his espresso cup down gently, his eyes sharp as glass. He knew the line between microaggression and open insult was now paper-thin. The cabin lights dimmed further, leaving only the soft glow from the private suites. Ethan approached again, his voice lower, sharper. "Could you lower the brightness on your laptop, ma'am? The light's disturbing other passengers." Nyla looked up, her tone still calm. "I'm in my private suite. The screen isn't facing anyone." "Even so," Ethan pressed, "passengers in this cabin usually don't cause distractions." The words dropped cold and clean, slicing through the polished quiet like a blade. The entire cabin went still. Justice Drake folded his newspaper, his eyes fixed on Ethan. And Nyla. She didn't respond. She simply closed her laptop, the screen going dark. In the dim light, her eyes remained open, calm, unwavering, and deep as still water. The first-class cabin was so quiet that even the faint murmur of the engines felt loud. The amber lights dimmed to a soft gold glow that brushed against the faces of a few half-sleeping passengers. Dr. Nyla Jefferson sat motionless. Her laptop was closed, its light extinguished. In the darkened space, only her heartbeat filled the silence, steady, deliberate, as if she were balancing between reason and the deep bruise of quiet humiliation. Across from her, Justice Malcolm Drake set down his newspaper and removed his glasses. His eyes met hers, calm, knowing he didn't need to speak. He'd seen this moment thousands of times in courtrooms the instant when someone is demeaned, and the perpetrator hides behind professionalism. He exhaled slowly, the sound of a man who had lived long enough to stop being surprised by injustice. His gaze carried empathy and the solemn weight of witness. Ethan Vance stood near the galley, pretending to arrange trays. The dim light revealed his unease, the kind that comes when one's conscience starts to whisper too loudly. He avoided Neela's eyes, but her silence pressed against him harder than any words could. 30,000 feet in the air, there was nowhere to hide from one's own reflection. Nyla kept her eyes on the window. The night sky stretched endlessly below dark clouds layered like a cold sea. Her reflection looked back at her small, still, and misunderstood. A memory flickered. Years ago, as a senior at Princeton, her professor had said in front of the class, "Miss Jefferson, your idea is ambitious, but perhaps a bit beyond your reach." She'd said nothing that day. She simply submitted the project to MIT, where it won national acclaim and later became the foundation of Helix Core Energy. Since then, she'd heard the same tone countless times, polite, rational, and soaked in doubt. The words changed. The message never did. The plane jolted softly in light turbulence. A few passengers adjusted their blankets. Robert Mallory turned a page of his newspaper, pretending to be absorbed in the print. Only Justice Drake kept watching her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes asking a silent question. "Are you going to let this pass?" Nyla moved slightly. She turned the glass of water in her hand, the sound of the liquid tapping the rim like a quiet metronome inside her chest. She thought of the young black women she'd met at conferences. Bright eyes, hopeful voices, believing the world had already changed. But if she stayed silent now, what would she be telling them? That success makes you immune to disrespect? That money or titles can buy dignity? No, she knew better. She straightened her back. Her face was calm, her decision firm. When Ethan returned to clear her tray, she spoke, her voice soft, but clear enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Mr. Vance, may I ask you something?" He froze. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you treat every passenger in this cabin by the same standard of service?" Ethan blinked. "Of course, ma'am. Why would you ask?" "Because I've noticed small differences in how you've treated me compared to others. Perhaps it wasn't intentional, but if something done unintentionally still causes harm, then it's still wrong." Her tone was low, and even no accusation. No anger, just truth, stated plainly enough to leave no room for denial. The cabin fell utterly still. Robert Mallory glanced over, uneasy. Justice. Drake rested his chin on his hand and gave a slow nod. Ethan's practiced smile faltered. A thin sheen of sweat appeared at his temple. "I'm sorry if you felt that way," he said quickly. "You may have misunderstood." Nyla didn't reply. She simply looked at him, and in that silence, his excuses dissolved. Moments later, Ethan retreated toward the galley. Justice Drake leaned toward her and said quietly, "You know, you just did what I've spent my whole life telling people to do, don't shout. Just tell the truth." Nyla smiled faintly. "I don't want to win against him. Judge, I just want him to remember." Drake nodded. "Oh, he will. And maybe his airline will, too." Her eyes softened. He wasn't talking about policy or lawsuits, he meant conscience. The kind that shifts when silence refuses to stay quiet. Nyla reached for her phone and typed a quick note, A709. Flight attendant, biased behavior, observation confirmed by passenger seat 1C, Justice Malcolm Drake. Document later. She wasn't writing to accuse, but to record, to preserve a fact she knew would matter later. That was how she always fought with reason, not rage. She understood this moment would spread not because she would shout it into the world, but because everyone who saw it would carry it with them. Silent justice had already begun to move. When the chief attendant, Helena Marquez, passed through the cabin, Justice Drake gestured subtly. "Ms. Marquez," he murmured, "you might want to know something's not right in this cabin." Helena frowned, scanning the room. Her eyes stopped on Nyla, composed uncomplaining. She recognized that kind of silence. It wasn't submission. It was awareness. Nyla leaned back and closed her eyes. There was no need to act in anger. She had already chosen a different kind of power, the quiet kind, born from self-respect. The engines hummed steadily, yet something in the air had shifted. The light, the glances, even the breathing in the cabin carried a new weight anticipation. Nyla knew this wasn't over, and the next time Ethan Vance approached, justice would no longer hide behind silence. Outside, the plane slipped deeper into the night. The cabin lights dimmed once more, leaving only the soft glow of Nyla's workstation. She opened her laptop to resume editing her report, unaware that this same light would soon become the spark that pushed Ethan beyond the final line he was never meant to cross. Outside the window, the night stretched endlessly, a sheet of black velvet without a single seam. Astra Airlines Flight AA709 cruised at 32,000 feet, somewhere between Dubai and Los Angeles. The first-class lights had dimmed. Most passengers drifted in that twilight between waking and sleep, lulled by the steady hum of engines, a rhythm too calm for the storm that was about to begin. In her private suite, Dr. Nyla Jefferson reopened her laptop. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, focused, serene, composed. She was reviewing notes for her upcoming meeting with the Helix Core Energy Board. Work had always been her refuge, an ordered place in a disordered world. Behind her, Ethan Vance approached. His footsteps were muted by the carpet, but in that stillness, each one struck like a knock against the air itself. He stopped beside her seat, leaning slightly forward. "Excuse me, Ms. Jefferson," he said smoothly, though his tone carried ice. "The light from your laptop is disturbing the other passengers." Nyla looked up, brow gently furrowing. The screen's glow was faint, contained within her suite, shielded by a privacy partition. It could not have disturbed anyone. She spoke evenly. "This light is confined to my own cabin. Mr. Vance, I've already dimmed it to the lowest setting. I doubt it's bothering anyone." Ethan's lips pressed into a line. "Ma'am, this cabin follows certain standards of quiet and respect. I'm just following protocol." Her reply came calm, precise. "Which regulation, exactly, prohibits a passenger from using a laptop during cruise altitude in a private suite?" Her voice wasn't raised, only exact. That precision landed sharper than volume ever could. Ethan faltered for half a second, glancing around. No one was watching. No one had complained. But instead of stepping back, he stepped closer. His voice dropped, low and cutting. You know, passengers in this cabin usually don't cause disruptions. The air froze. He had said it. Not loud, not crude, but the meaning was naked, too clear to hide behind politeness. Across the aisle, Justice Malcolm Drake heard every word. He set his espresso cup down, eyes narrowing. 30 years on the bench had trained him to recognize the moment a boundary snapped, and this was it. He looked to Nyla. She didn't move, didn't blink. The silence grew thick enough to hear her pulse. Ethan waited, expecting anger, expecting her to react so he could reassert control. But Nyla only took a slow, measured breath. Then she closed the laptop. The soft click of the hinge echoed like a final note of restraint. She raised her eyes. They were calm, but unyielding, so steady that Ethan instinctively took half a step back. You said, passengers in this cabin? Correct. Her tone was low, each word landing clean and heavy, like a gavel strike. Ethan blinked. Yes. I was just saying. No. She interrupted, her voice still soft but surgical. What you meant was that I don't fit your idea of who belongs here. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The confidence, the practiced charm, all slipped from his face. Robert Mallory, in seat 2B, glanced up. The confusion in his eyes slowly gave way to shame. Justice Drake shifted slightly, his gaze steady on both of them. In the stillness, something invisible turned the weight of moral gravity, the slow tilt of justice beginning to lean. Nyla reached up and pulled the window shade open. Moonlight spilled across the wing, silver against the darkness. Her voice was quiet, reflective. You know, Vance, I once thought that after all the years of study and work, I'd finally be seen for my ability. But maybe I've been giving the world too much credit. Ethan looked down. His lips moved as if to speak, but no apology came. Nyla's tone softened, but the softness was colder than anger. I'm not angry with you. You're just one small piece of something much larger. Something I've spent my career trying to fix. He turned and walked away, wordless. Justice Drake watched him go, the lines around his mouth tightening. He knew the look of a man who had just condemned himself. The air in the cabin grew heavier, as if oxygen had thinned. Robert Mallory cleared his throat. Ms. Jefferson, are you all right? She turned toward him, her expression faintly tired, but kind. I'm fine. Just used to it. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of being doubted, questioned, measured differently, no matter how high she climbed. Justice Drake leaned forward. You shouldn't have to be. Let me be your witness. Nyla shook her head gently. No, Judge, I'll speak for myself. Not to retaliate, but so this moment can be seen. She picked up her phone, typed deliberately, Incident, Ethan Vance, Flight AA709 Astra Airlines. Statement of bias made in presence of Malcolm Drake. She saved it. Screen darkened. No trembling, no tears. Only the silence of someone who had just laid the first stone in the path toward justice. She leaned back, closed her eyes. Outside, the sky was vast and still, indifferent to what had just cracked open inside that quiet cabin. Back in the galley, Ethan stood frozen in the half-light. For the first time, he no longer looked like a polished professional. He looked like a man afraid not of punishment, but of recognition. Helena Marquez, the chief attendant, stepped forward, her voice low and firm. Ethan, she said, eyes narrowing, what exactly just happened in first class? He hesitated, hands tightening around the service tray, and for a long moment, the only answer he had was silence. The first-class cabin of Astra Airlines Flight AA709 floated in soft amber light, hushed and orderly, as though the world outside had fallen asleep. But in seat 2A, where Dr. Neela Jefferson sat, the air was heavy thick with something unseen. Ethan Vance returned. His face was flushed, the collar of his uniform too tight around his neck. The tension that had built all flight, the glances, the tone, the quiet defiance was now pressing against his composure. He stopped beside her, gripping his service logbook. His voice came rough but polite, strained through clenched control. "Ms. Jefferson, I need to see your boarding pass." No one moved. Only the faint hum of the engines filled the stillness. The cabin light caught her cheekbones serene, unwavering. Nyla lifted her gaze slowly. "Excuse me." Ethan inhaled sharply, eyes flicking away, but his tone stayed firm. "I need to confirm you're seated correctly. This is a first-class cabin, and I don't see your name on my list." The words fell clean and cold, sharper than a direct insult. "Across the aisle." Robert Mallory looked up from his paper. His eyes shifted between them, uncertain, then landed on Nyla, whose expression held no anger, only a composed stillness that made everyone else uneasy. She closed her laptop gently, folded her hands, and spoke with quiet precision. "Mr. Vance, you have the flight manifest. My name is there, seat 2A. If you have doubts, call your purser to verify. I'll wait." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried across the cabin like a calm declaration. Several passengers turned their heads. No one spoke. Ethan's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to stay so composed. Something about her control, her refusal to break, made him feel smaller. And that smallness stung. "That won't be necessary," he said quickly, his voice beginning to tremble. "I just need to see your boarding pass. It's standard procedure." Nyla's eyes lifted, cool and unwavering. "Are you sure about that? Have you asked the gentleman in seat 2B or 1C to show theirs?" Ethan froze. The silence expanded thick, electric. From across the aisle, Justice Malcolm Drake set down his espresso cup and slowly stood. The quiet scrape of his chair sounded louder than thunder in that tense air. He stepped closer, his voice low but commanding, every word deliberate and heavy as a gavel strike. "Mr. Vance, my name is Justice Malcolm Drake, retired Supreme Court judge." Ethan blinked, startled, but Drake continued. "The woman you're questioning is Dr. Nyla Jefferson, CEO of Helix Core Energy. She just addressed the World Economic Forum in Davos, where I, too, once spoke." His voice never rose, but it carried the unmistakable weight of truth and authority. A ripple moved through the cabin. Someone gasped softly. Robert Mallory lowered his eyes, his face flushing with embarrassment. Ethan stood frozen, color draining from his face. His hands trembled slightly, gripping the logbook as if it were an anchor. He looked like a man realizing too late that he had just stepped off a ledge. Neela didn't move, didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth stood on its own, louder than any argument, final as judgment. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing a faint smile. I was only following procedure. Ms. Jefferson. No offense intended." Justice Drake tilted his head, his tone cool and exact. "Procedure. I've reviewed the operational manuals of Astra Airlines. There is no clause authorizing attendants to demand tickets from passengers already seated unless there's a security concern. Do you see one here?" The words hit like a verdict. Ethan didn't answer. The sharp uniform that once gave him authority now looked constricting, like armor turned against its wearer. Nyla finally spoke, her voice soft but cutting in its clarity. I understand. Sometimes people don't act out of malice, but out of the illusion that they have power. She turned her gaze to the window, where the wing glimmered silver under the moonlight. But true power is knowing when to stop. No one in the cabin moved. Even time seemed to pause, as though the world itself were listening. Ethan lowered his head. I'm sorry, ma'am, but apologies couldn't restore what he'd just lost: respect, trust, the integrity of his own role. Justice Drake returned to his seat, unfolded his newspaper, and resumed reading, though his eyes stayed forward, sharp, watchful. Ethan turned toward the galley, his shoulders tight, his steps uncertain. From the corner of his eye, he could feel the quiet judgment of every passenger following him down the aisle. Nyla reopened her laptop. The soft light returned, washing her face in calm resolve. No one complained. Outside, the plane cut through a layer of silver clouds. Inside, order had been restored not by authority, but by truth. At the end of the cabin, the galley door opened. Helena Marquez, the chief attendant, stepped in. She had already been alerted by a passenger. Her eyes were sharp, professional, but unforgiving. She stopped in front of Ethan. Mr. Vance, she said quietly, we need to talk. Ethan didn't argue. He simply nodded, eyes downcast, because deep down, he knew the conversation that awaited him wasn't about procedure. It was about accountability. The first-class cabin of Astra Airlines flight OAM-09 remained silent, so quiet it seemed the air itself refused to move. Ethan had vanished behind the galley curtain, leaving a heavy stillness behind him. Every pair of eyes, furtive or open, rested on Dr. Neela Jefferson. The woman who had just made the entire cabin witness something that should never have happened. She sat motionless, hands resting lightly on the table. The pale glow of her laptop touched her face, serene and unreadable. No triumph, no anger, only fatigue, the kind that comes from having to prove what's right too many times. Then the galley door opened. Helena Marquez, the purser, stepped in, a tall woman in her 50s, hair pinned in a tight bun, sharp brown eyes set in a face that had seen every kind of flight and every kind of passenger. She moved with the composed authority of someone who had held chaos together at 30,000 feet. She stopped by Nyla's seat, bowed her head slightly. Forgive the interruption. Dr. Jefferson, I'm Helena Marquez, the purser for this flight. I was told there's been an incident. Nyla closed her laptop, her tone even but clear. Yes, I want to report a series of disrespectful actions by your flight attendant, Ethan Vance. Not one isolated moment, repeated conduct, consistent in tone and clearly biased. Helena's eyes flicked briefly across the cabin. Several passengers pretended to read, but none of them missed a word. Could you be specific? Please. Nyla spoke steadily, her voice controlled, every word a deliberate fact. Plastic cup instead of crystal. Dismissive tone. The comment about passengers in this cabin. And finally, the demand to see her boarding pass. No embellishment, no dramatization, just truth. Clean and exact. When she finished, the silence thickened again. Helena turned her gaze to Justice Malcolm Drake, seated across the aisle. Sir, can you confirm this? Drake nodded once. I can. I witnessed every part of it. There is no misunderstanding here. His voice was calm, heavy with the authority of a man who'd spent a lifetime weighing right from wrong. Helena's fingers tightened around her notepad. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Your Honor. I understand. She stepped back, lifted her intercom. Galley 1. This is Purser Marquez. I need Ethan Vance at the front immediately. Moments later, Ethan appeared. He walked stiffly, shoulders tense, his polished confidence now a fragile mask. Helena faced him squarely. Ethan, I've received a formal report from Dr. Jefferson and confirmation from a witness. Do you have anything to say? Ethan's jaw twitched. I was just following procedure, ma'am. There may have been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Helena's tone stayed low, but her words cut clean. Did you ask any other passenger in this cabin to show their boarding pass? Ethan said nothing. Did you alter your tone or level of service with anyone else? Silence again. Helena exhaled slowly, then spoke with finality. Then there is no misunderstanding. You crossed the line both professionally and ethically. Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Return to the crew station and remain there. I will report this directly to the captain and HR upon landing. The cabin went utterly still. The engines hummed beneath the moment like a low, solemn score. Ethan froze, then lowered his head, his voice barely audible. Yes, ma'am. He turned away, moving quickly down the aisle, eyes fixed on the floor. But before disappearing behind the curtain, he looked once more toward Nyla, an expression tangled with shame, anger, and something like fear. Helena turned back to Nyla and inclined her head. On behalf of Astra Airlines, I deeply apologize. Dr. Jefferson, his behavior does not represent our standard of service. Nyla's voice was soft, but unwavering. I understand. I know not everyone is like him. What saddens me is that something like this can still happen even here, in a space meant to represent the best of the world. Helena said nothing, only nodded. She knew that better than anyone. The smallest cracks, left unattended, could bring down an entire reputation overnight. Justice Drake's calm voice joined quietly. Ms. Marquez, I'd advise the airline to review this carefully. This passenger isn't just first class. She's a global leader in energy and corporate ethics. Helena's eyes flicked toward Nyla. The younger woman smiled faintly, neither confirming nor denying. Helena understood instantly. If this story ever reached the ground, it wouldn't stop at an apology. She gestured toward another attendant. Prepare the forward suite and ensure Dr. Jefferson has everything she needs. Transfer her to Royal Suite 1A. Nyla shook her head gently. That won't be necessary. I'm fine here. Helena's tone softened, but her eyes stayed firm. No, Dr. Jefferson. That's my policy. And so quietly. Nyla was moved to the very front of the cabin not by demand, but by respect. The other passengers watched in silence. No one spoke. Yet everyone understood. Power had just changed hands. The woman once underestimated now commanded the entire room. The man who once held authority now sat stripped of it, behind a curtain. Helena bowed slightly. A full report will be sent to the captain and headquarters immediately. And, Dr. Jefferson, please accept my personal apology. Nyla inclined her head. Thank you. Ms. Marquez, I believe the way an organization responds to a mistake says more about it than the mistake itself. Helena held her gaze a moment long enough to understand she had just been given both a warning and a gift. Then she turned and left, her steps silent on the carpet. The cabin remained hushed, heavy with reflection. Justice Drake smiled faintly. You see, Nyla, he said, his voice like gravel and wisdom. I told you justice doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just stands still, and people listen. Nyla looked at him, her expression soft. No, Judge, justice only finds its voice when someone like you chooses to hear. The engines droned on, steady and distant, outside. The stars burned cold above the wing. Silent witnesses to the quiet turning of power, 30,000 feet above the world. The first-class cabin of Astra Airlines flight AA709 was silent again, but it was no longer the soft, comfortable quiet of takeoff. It was the heavy kind, the kind that follows after people witness justice appear, not through shouting, but through stillness. Helena Marquez, the purser, stepped forward into the center aisle. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes moved across each face passengers pretending to read, avoiding her gaze, but none of them were truly looking at their pages. She drew a steady breath and began, her voice low, measured, carrying the calm authority of truth. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Astra Airlines, I would like to extend our sincerest apology. One of our crew members has acted inappropriately during service. I want to make it clear that behavior does not represent the values or standards of Astra Airlines. Silence, no applause, no whispers, only the steady hum of engines cold, distant, and unbroken. Helena turned slightly, facing Dr. Neela Jefferson. Dr. Jefferson, she said, her tone softening. Mr. Ethan Vance has been relieved of duty and confined to the galley until further instruction from the captain. Please allow me to escort you to Royal Suite 1A to ensure your privacy and comfort. Nyla shook her head lightly. That's not necessary. I'm fine here. Helene smiled faintly, but her resolve held firm. You may not need it, Doctor, but I do need to make things right. Please. Nyla studied her for a quiet moment, then nodded once. All right. Helena bowed slightly and motioned for a crew member to open the way. Every eye in the cabin followed as Nyla rose, closed her laptop, and walked slowly past the rows of polished leather seats. There were no murmurs now, no subtle glances of judgment, only uneasy silence and something that felt almost like respect. Justice Malcolm Drake watched her go, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He'd seen reversals of power in courtrooms all his life, but rarely one as graceful as this, a verdict rendered without a gavel, a victory claimed without a single word raised. Back in the galley, Ethan Vance sat slumped in a jump seat, uniform creased, eyes down. Helena stepped in, her tone colder now. You understand how serious this is, don't you? He didn't answer. She's not just a passenger, Helena continued, voice firm, deliberate. She's Dr. Neela Jefferson, CEO of Helix Core Energy, the same woman who just spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and the man who witnessed everything. Justice Malcolm Drake, retired Supreme Court Justice of the United States. Ethan's head snapped up. What Helena folded her arms. You didn't just insult a passenger. Ethan, you disrespected two people whose voices carry weight across the world. If this story reaches the ground, it won't just cost you your job. It could cost this airline its name. Ethan's hands clenched, knuckles pale. I didn't mean to. I just thought, yes. Helena cut in quietly. You thought? And that's the problem. When prejudice guides thought, it can destroy an entire career in a single sentence. She turned away. Stay here. Captain Lee will speak with me, not with you. Returning to the cabin. Helena moved like someone balancing two worlds, one of corporate image and one of human decency, in Royal Suite 1A. Everything had been redone, fresh linens, crystal glassware, a bouquet of white orchids. Helena set a glass of wine gently on the table, then straightened up. "Dr. Jefferson," she said, "on behalf of Astra Airlines, I apologize again. A simple apology can't erase what happened. But please believe there are still people among us who know how to feel ashamed when they witness something wrong." Nyla looked at her. No coldness, just quiet empathy. "I believe you, and I believe your company will do what's right." Helena nodded. "We will." She left the suite, closing the door softly behind her. Through the window, moonlight traced silver over the wing, the ocean below a seamless black expanse. In the cockpit, Captain Rowan Lee listened to Helena's report, face expressionless, nodding slowly as she described the sequence of events. "Prepare a written record and witness confirmation," he said. "I'll speak with Dr. Jefferson myself after landing. As for Mr. Vance, he's suspended until further notice." His tone was even, absolute, the voice of a man accustomed to control, not just of machines, but of human crisis. Minutes later, Helena's calm voice filled the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the earlier service incident has been addressed. The crew member involved has been relieved of duty. Astra Airlines sincerely apologizes for the experience and reaffirms that such behavior does not reflect our company's standards. No justification, no deflection. Only accountability spoken clearly into the air at 30,000 feet." Justice Drake looked up from his newspaper. A few passengers nodded subtly. Others sighed, thoughtful. Some looked toward Nyla's suite with new eyes that finally saw her for who she was. Drake smiled faintly and leaned back. High above the clouds, justice had been served not with a hammer strike, but with a single, unembellished truth spoken aloud. In the quiet of her suite, Nella Jefferson lifted her glass, watched the moonlight refract across the wine. Outside, the night stretched endless and black, and she thought perhaps justice is like light small, fragile, but enough to tear through the dark. She smiled softly, not the smile of victory, but of someone who had just watched the right thing finally, quietly, be done. Morning broke over Los Angeles in a pale wash of gold, sunlight slipping through a thin veil of fog. On Century Boulevard, a convoy of dark limousines eased out of LAX, their reflections gliding across the wet asphalt. In one of them sat Dr. Nyla Jefferson, silent, her expression as still as the surface of a lake. Astra Airlines Flight AA709 had landed safely. No noise, no tweets, no headlines, but inside Nyla, something lingered. Not anger, but a quiet pull toward responsibility. That night, high above the glittering sprawl of downtown Los Angeles, city lights shimmered against the glass walls of her apartment. Nyla sat at her desk, opened her laptop. She didn't write a complaint. She wasn't interested in making an example of anyone. Instead, she began a new document. Subject enhancing equity and awareness. Across Astra Airlines. Her fingers paused for a moment, then began to type steady, deliberate. There was no bitterness in the movement, only purpose. She described the chain of subtle but undeniable lapses she'd experienced, the small moments when difference became distance, the instant when procedure turned into prejudice. But her tone wasn't accusatory. It was analytical, precise, the voice of a leader who had spent her career dissecting invisible systems of bias hidden in plain sight. "The issue does not lie with an individual," she wrote. "It lies within a system unequipped to recognize the unconscious bias embedded in its training structure. When an employee believes they are just doing their job, while actually enacting discrimination, the fault isn't theirs alone. It belongs to the framework that taught them so." Then she pivoted. At Helix Core Energy, we've developed an AI platform called Lumen, designed to monitor service interactions and provide real-time feedback. I propose a collaboration between Helix Core and Astra Airlines to create a simulation-based training model, helping crew members identify and correct unconscious bias before it manifests in real-world behavior. Her last line came slowly, each word deliberate, almost whispered. I'm not here to bring one person down. I'm here to lift an entire system. She read it once more, made a few quiet edits, then pressed send. The email went straight to Charles Green, CEO of Astra Airlines. Outside, the city pulsed with light. Nayla sat back, letting the glow of the screen reflect in her eyes. There was fatigue there, but no resentment. She wasn't fighting for revenge. She was doing what true leaders do, turning insult into improvement. The next morning, London, in the glass tower of Astra Airlines global headquarters, Charles Green, silver-haired, calm, known for his fairness and distance, opened his inbox. At the top sat an email from Dr. Neela Jefferson with an attachment titled Helix Core Equity Proposal, PDF. He read it once, slowly, then again. When he reached the final line, I'm not here to bring one person down. I'm here to lift an entire system. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled. 30 years in aviation, and he had never seen a response like this. No demands, no threats, just clarity, integrity, and the kind of grace that forces a person to reflect. He picked up the phone. Helena, I just read Dr. Jefferson's email. Do you know who she is on the other end? Helena's voice was steady. Yes, sir, I do. And I think the world needs more people like her. Charles nodded slightly. Set up a video call with her. Today. That afternoon, they met screen to screen. Nyla appeared composed as ever, white blouse, hair tied back, tone calm but firm. Across the ocean, in his London office, Charles Green looked into the camera and spoke first. Dr. Jefferson, he said, voice low but sincere, I'd like to personally apologize on behalf of Astra Airlines. No one should ever be treated the way you were, but I must say your response was extraordinary. Nayla smiled faintly. Thank you, Mr. Green, but I'm not looking for apologies. I'm looking for change. A system is only strong when it has the courage to examine its own flaws. Charles nodded slowly. And you've just given us the chance to do that. They began to talk not about the incident, but about what could come next. Helix Core would adapt its Lumen Insight platform for Astra Airlines to analyze tone and behavior in real time, to flag subtle patterns of bias in speech and service, and to train employees through immersive, culturally diverse simulations. By the end of the meeting, the CEO of one of the world's largest airlines leaned forward, his voice softened by respect. Dr. Jefferson, he said, I used to think justice belonged only in a courtroom, but today I understand it can begin with one quiet act done at the right moment, Neela replied. Almost gently, justice isn't about punishment. Mr. Green, it's about restoring what once made people small. 3 weeks later, Project Lumen launched, not as a crisis management initiative, but as a global training program. News outlets carried the story Astra Airlines partners with Helix Core Energy to develop AI-driven training that detects and corrects unconscious bias in customer service. No one mentioned Flight AA709. They didn't need to. Those who were there already knew that's where it began. In her Los Angeles office, Nyla stood by the window. Below her, the city stretched out in a grid of living light. Each one a person, a story, a chance to be treated fairly. Inside her, there was no triumph, only a quiet sense of peace. Justice had spoken not in courts, not in headlines, but in the quiet transformation of a system willing to listen. She watched the city glow, and for the first time since that flight, she allowed herself to breathe, knowing that sometimes the most powerful verdicts are the ones delivered in silence. At 6 o'clock the next morning, as the first sunlight brushed the California coast, newsrooms across the United States began receiving the same unexpected email. Subject: when silence speaks louder than outrage. From Justice Malcolm Drake, retired U.S. Supreme Court Justice. Attachment: Astra Flight AA709 Incident Report. It wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic. It simply told what had happened. He described what he'd seen, how a black woman was quietly diminished, how she answered not with fury, but with clarity, and how, in the thin air between continents, she made a system look at itself. No names were mentioned. No blame was assigned. Only one closing line lingered in the mind long after reading. I spent my life trying to understand justice. Last night, I saw it in the eyes of a woman who didn't need a courtroom to win. The post appeared on the National Bar Association's blog and spread within hours. By sunset, it had gone viral. Tens of thousands of shares, thousands of comments. 2 hashtags rose to the top of Twitter's feed: Croastra fail and equality at 30K feet. No one needed the full story. It was enough to know that an airline had crossed a line, and a woman had risen above it with grace, in an age that celebrated outrage as power. Dr. Nyla Jefferson's composure felt revolutionary. A columnist from The Atlantic wrote, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard." Across the ocean, the Astra Airlines communications department was in chaos. Phone lines jammed. Reporters calling nonstop. Within hours, a crisis meeting was called in the London headquarters. Charles Green stood at the head of the table, his voice low, steady. "We don't deny. We don't deflect. We acknowledge. We apologize. And we show the world that Astra will not let this happen again." He ordered the suspension of the entire flight crew pending review, and announced an independent investigation by a third-party ethics firm. But what stunned the media more than the airline's response was hers. When a journalist finally reached Nyla Jefferson, she offered only one sentence. "I'm not offended. I'm reminded that the world still has work to do." In a media age addicted to noise, her restraint cut deeper than fury. She didn't fuel the fire. She let conscience light it instead. Meanwhile, in East London, Ethan Vance sat alone in a small rented flat, the curtains half drawn. His phone buzzed nonstop. Every notification another reminder of a name he could no longer escape: Ethan V. A few strangers defended him. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Most didn't. The internet had already decided. Within days, his life unraveled. The man once proud to be the face of first-class service was now a symbol of everything the industry tried to hide. When the official email arrived, he read it twice, lips dry. Termination due to conduct inconsistent with company values. One sentence. 30 years of ambition gone. He tried to apply elsewhere, but the aviation world was small, and word moved fast. No airline wanted a scandal. No luxury hotel wanted his resume on file. Friends stopped calling. Those who once shared champagne with him at the crew lounge now looked away when passing him on the street. Every time he saw the Astra Airlines logo, his chest tightened, not from anger, but from the realization that he had never really understood the world he thought he belonged to. On sleepless nights, he scrolled through the news. Sometimes he saw Nyla Jefferson on magazine covers Forbes, Bloomberg, Fortune. Her smile poised, calm, the same one from the flight. He would close his laptop quickly, not in envy, in shame, because now he understood she hadn't destroyed him. She'd simply let gravity do its work. In Los Angeles, Justice Malcolm Drake received an email from an old colleague. Malcolm, did you know your piece is being used in corporate ethics trainings? He smiled faintly over his morning coffee. That's good, he typed back. Justice sometimes just needs a story to be seen. In London, Astra Airlines officially announced Project Lumen, its partnership with Helix Core Energy to build AI-driven bias detection for global training. The media hailed it as a landmark step toward ethical innovation in aviation. No one mentioned the flight. They didn't have to. Everyone knew where it started. In her Los Angeles office, Nyla stood by the window, city lights sprawling beneath her. She knew somewhere, perhaps across the sea, Ethan might be reading the news too. She didn't wish him pain, only understanding that the worth of a person isn't defined by title or skin, but by how they treat others when no one is watching. On to Obinti de Post. A month later, Astra Airlines received the Diversity Commitment Award from the Global Aviation Review. At the ceremony, Charles Green quoted her words, "Justice isn't about bringing someone down. It's about lifting the system up." The hall erupted in applause. In the front row, Nyla smiled quietly and inclined her head. It wasn't triumph, it was closure. And somewhere beyond the sound of clapping hands, the world turned just a little closer toward balance. London in March wore a quiet gray. Fine mist clung to the car windows as Dr. Nyla Jefferson's motorcade moved through Canary Wharf, the city's financial heart. Outside, the Thames flowed in silence like a witness to something weightier than billion-pound contracts. The Astra headquarters tower emerged from the fog, steel and glass rising toward the pale sky. Nyla stepped from the car, wrapped in a black wool coat. Her steps echoed lightly along the marble corridor. Heads turned not because she was famous, but because her presence carried that rare kind of gravity calm, unflinching, quietly commanding respect without demanding it. In the 32nd floor boardroom, sunlight filtered through the glass walls, soft and silvery over the city. Charles Green, Astra's CEO, stood waiting with the board. The mood was solemn but not defensive. On the polished table lay a single folder labeled Project Lumen, a path to conscious service. Charles rose, extending his hand. "Dr. Jefferson," he said, with the steady grace of a man who'd been waiting to make something right. "Thank you for coming to London. Today isn't about mistakes, it's about what comes next." Nyla smiled faintly. "And what comes next?" "Mr. Green doesn't come from firing people, but from teaching them how not to repeat the same mistakes." She opened her laptop and connected to the main display. Across the screen appeared 5 words in quiet white text. Project Lumen. From unconscious darkness to conscious light. Her voice was even, measured not the voice of a lecturer, but of someone inviting others to see a reflection of themselves. "We live in a world where most people believe they're fair," she began, "yet their actions often tell a different story. Bias doesn't live in the law. It lives in reflex. Few intend harm, but when we fail to recognize it, harm happens all the same." The room fell completely silent. Project Lumen isn't just a software, Neela continued. It's a mirror, a way for an organization to see itself clearly. She clicked to the next slide. A 3D simulation appeared, a first-class cabin. It looked strikingly familiar. An attendant served passengers while HelixCore's AI system tracked voice tone, proximity, and subtle body language, displaying a real-time bias index in glowing color bars. Lumen monitors tone, posture, frequency of service, Nyla explained, and highlights disparities between passenger groups. When patterns emerge, it doesn't punish, it teaches. The goal isn't control, it's awareness. A senior HR executive spoke up, uneasy. But won't that feel invasive for our staff? Neela nodded slowly. That's why Lumen is not a policing tool. It's a teaching one. Justice born of fear doesn't last. True change begins with understanding. The words landed like soft thunder. Charles exchanged a look with his board, then turned back to her. Do you have a rollout plan? She advanced another slide. Inclusive crew structure. Every flight team representing diverse backgrounds. Scenario immersion. VR simulations placing attendants in the position of those who felt overlooked. Behavioral metrics AI measuring progress through empathy, not test scores. She looked up, her tone deepening. And most importantly, every flight will have a service equity officer, someone accountable for fairness, just as the captain is for safety. Across the table, Margaret Wu, a board member of Chinese descent, spoke quietly. This isn't just a program, it's an ethical declaration. Charles smiled. Exactly. And Astra should be the first to declare it. He rose and extended his hand once more. Dr. Jefferson, on behalf of the board, I'm approving Project Lumen. The budget is £12.5 million, but its real value isn't in numbers. Neela shook his hand. No applause, no headlines, just the steady silence that follows when something right is done. A man acknowledging fault, a woman choosing reform over revenge. As the meeting ended, Neela paused by the window. London stretched beneath a fading gold sky, the rain finally clearing. From behind her came a familiar voice. Helena Marquez, now Astra's new training advisor. You've done what this company couldn't in decades, Helena said softly. Not punish, inspire. Neela smiled. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just listened longer than I spoke. Helena nodded, her voice almost a whisper. Justice sometimes needs quiet hands doing the right thing. Ew. That night, Project Lumen went live on Astra's official website. No press event, no glossy campaign, just a single line of text beneath the logo. Astra Airlines is committed to fairness at every altitude. Within 48 hours, the company's stock rose 4%. But to Neela, the truest reward came quietly in the form of an email from a young intern. Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. Because of you, I don't feel like I have to earn belonging anymore. I just have to do my best knowing I already belong. Nyla leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Her mind drifted to that quiet night between Dubai and Los Angeles, to the dim light of the cabin, to the young man who had fallen. Not because someone pushed him, but because he never learned when to stand still. She wasn't glad he'd fallen. She only hoped that one day, if he found the courage to rise again, he'd finally understand what she had tried to show him, that justice never sets out to destroy. It waits, patiently, for people to grow into the light. Night in Los Angeles has its own kind of light, soft, restrained, almost private, as if the city itself has learned that not everything needs to shine to be seen. On the 39th floor, Dr. Neela Jefferson's apartment glowed with a warm amber hue. The table was set. Scented candles flickered beside half-filled wine glasses. A quiet jazz record hummed through a small speaker, more memory than melody. Across from her sat Lena Jefferson, Neela's younger sister. She swirled her glass, watching the burgundy ripple in the dim light. Her voice came hesitant, almost childlike. "Hey, were you hurt, by what he said?" Nyla looked up. Her eyes caught the golden reflection of the candle flame. She was silent for a moment, not unsure, just careful. Then she answered, softly. "It wasn't the words, Lena. It was how familiar they felt." The sentence hung in the air light, but heavy enough to still the room. "Familiar?" Lena asked. Nyla smiled faintly. "Not bitter, just tired." "Yes, because I've heard them all my life. Not always out loud, sometimes in a look, a pause, a shrug. From classrooms to boardrooms to first-class cabins, every space I entered came with a quiet question I never asked for. Do you belong here?" She set her glass down, hands folding gently together. "When I was in college," she continued, "I was the only black woman in my international economics program. Every time I spoke, people looked at me as if to say, 'You sure you understand?' Later on Wall Street, someone told me, 'You're lucky. We're trying to diversify.' And when I became a CEO, headlines said, 'A story of triumph for a woman of color.' They didn't see the sleepless nights, just the skin." Lena said nothing. She didn't have to. Nyla turned toward the window. The city glittered below, reflected in her eyes, dark, steady, endless. She said quietly, "the hardest part isn't the insult, it's the restraint."
Holding yourself back every day, in every room, so you don't become the angry person they already think you are. When Ethan said, "Passengers in this cabin usually don't cause trouble," I wasn't angry. I was tired, because I knew somewhere another black woman was hearing something just like that, and she'd stay silent, because if she spoke, they'd say she was overreacting. Lena nodded slowly. "But you didn't stay silent." Neela gave a small smile. "No, because this time, it wasn't just about me. I thought about the girls coming after us, about Mom, about you. If I stayed quiet, they'd think it was normal. If I spoke, maybe the world would have to stop pretending it didn't see." The room went still. Only the ticking clock filled the space between them, measured, patient, like time itself listening in. After a while, Lena asked softly, "Do you ever get scared? Carrying all that weight, being the one who has to be right all the time." Neela looked at her, eyes calm. "Of course I do, but fear doesn't mean retreat. There were moments I wanted to disappear, to just live small and quiet. But then I'd ask myself, if everyone chooses comfort, who's left to change what's wrong?" She rose and walked toward the wide glass pane. Los Angeles stretched below, alive with stories she would never know. The lights shimmered like tiny heartbeats across the dark grid of the city. "I don't hate Ethan," she said finally, her tone almost tender. "If I did, I'd only see him as an offender. But if I look deeper, I see someone raised by a society that never taught him to see people like me. I don't want revenge. I want to rewrite the code." Lena came up behind her and wrapped her arms around her sister. They stood by the window, two silhouettes framed by a city that still hadn't figured out how to be kind. It wasn't a dramatic embrace, just a quiet recognition that the hardest part of being a black woman isn't the pain itself, but the patience it takes to keep loving the world that keeps testing you. After a moment, Lena whispered,
You know, when I was little, I thought justice was men in black robes in courtrooms. But watching you now, I think justice looks like a woman, silent but unbowed. Neela smiled, eyes glinting faintly. Maybe you're right. She poured the last of the wine, the candlelight catching the rim of her glass. Her face, reflected in the window, was neither hard nor triumphant, just serene, like someone who had walked through fire and learned how not to burn others on her way out. Tomorrow, she said, I'm flying to New York. They've asked me to speak at the United Nations Leadership and Equity. I won't tell my story. I'll tell theirs. The ones who've stayed quiet their whole lives just so the world could stay comfortable. Because sometimes silence is a voice if anyone's still listening. Lena looked at her sister with something like awe. The world needs people like you, Neela, not to be symbols, but to remind us that justice doesn't have to shout. It just has to stand still in the right place. Neela exhaled softly, gaze drifting beyond the glass. Maybe justice just passes through quietly and leaves behind a story for someone else to tell. Outside, the city pulsed below them, and in that still apartment, high above the noise, two black women sat in the soft light, one who had fought her way into history, and one who had just learned what dignity sounds like when it speaks in a whisper. It was an early autumn morning in Los Angeles. Dr. Neela Jefferson woke before dawn, before the light could spill through the glass walls of her apartment. She brewed a cup of black coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The city below was still half asleep, veiled in a thin mist, but her phone was already alive with 100 notifications. A message from Harvard Business Review. Congratulations, Dr. Jefferson. Our special issue. The Future of Leadership launches today. You're on the cover. Below it, a text from Forbes Global Culture Shaper, Dr. Neela Jefferson. She read them without smiling. Not because they meant nothing, but because she had long learned that recognition was never the destination. It was only a sign that she had stayed true to the path. She sipped her coffee. The morning air brushed cold against her skin, and in that quiet space between breath and thought, she found herself thinking about Ethan Vance. Across the country, another city was waking New York, gray and restless as ever. But Ethan wasn't waking up. He had never gone to bed. He sat on a rusted metal chair in the janitor's lounge of a Manhattan office tower. On his chest, a plastic badge read Vance, maintenance staff. It was 3. He had just mopped the marble floors on the 27th floor, the same floor where a massive poster stretched across the wall. Hoaliker, leading with light. He stopped, eyes fixed on it. There she was, Neela Jefferson, smiling in the picture, poised, luminous, utterly unbothered by the ghosts of her past. He stood frozen for a long time. The mop hung midair, the fluorescent lights glinting on the polished floor, reflecting the face of the woman he had once looked down on. A coworker passed by, nudging him. "Yo, Vance. You know her or something." Ethan swallowed, his voice barely audible. "No one. Just someone I used to meet." He said it softly, like a man trying not to hear his own confession. After the Astra Airlines incident, Ethan had tried to rebuild. He applied to other airlines, other hotels, but every application ended the same way, a polite rejection after background review. In the industry, they called it the red list. It meant don't even try. At first, he blamed everyone, Neela, Helena, the company, the world. But after a while, when every door closed, He ran out of names to blame. Only his own remained. That winter, he lost his apartment. A former co-worker took pity and found him a night job cleaning office buildings. He told himself it was temporary, but weeks turned to months, months to years. The hands that once poured champagne in crystal glasses were now cracked by cleaning chemicals. The tie he once adjusted before each shift now tied a garbage bag shut. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Nyla stood on stage at the Global Leadership Summit in Geneva. She wore a white suit, simple, immaculate, not as a symbol, but as a person who had grown accustomed to carrying the weight of visibility. She didn't speak of pain. She didn't use the word racism. She spoke of responsibility, of how those with power must learn not only to look at others, but to see them. When she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Some wept. Nyla only smiled gently, because she knew the person who needed to hear it most wasn't in that room. Later that same night, Ethan sat on a wooden bench at the end of his shift. The building was silent except for the faint hum of the cleaning machines. A security guard switched on a small TV. The screen flickered to CNN Doctor. Nyla Jefferson honored as global icon in corporate culture reform. Ethan froze. Her face appeared again. Same calm smile. Same steady eyes. He watched for a long moment, then whispered barely a sound. "You won. Nyla. No bitterness, no anger. Just truth late, but clear." He stood, looking out the tall glass window. Manhattan's lights shimmered across the skyline. His reflection looked back at him, older, smaller, yet somehow more honest. "You didn't bring me down," he said quietly. "I did." For the first time, he didn't see Nyla as the reason for his fall. He saw her as the mirror he had refused to face, the reminder of what he could have been if he had learned respect before it was too late. That same hour in Los Angeles, Nyla was at a Forbes gala, signing copies of the magazine. A reporter asked, "If you could go back to that moment on the plane, would you do anything differently?" She paused, her gaze distant but gentle. "No, I'd still respond the same way. But maybe I'd tell him I hope he learned something from it. Forgiveness isn't for others. It's how you keep your own heart from turning to stone." Later, as she stepped out into the night, Nyla looked up. Above the city, a plane crossed the dark sky, its lights blinking faintly between the stars. She watched until it became just a thread of silver fading into the black, and in that still moment, she wondered perhaps somewhere, across another skyline, Ethan was looking up too, at the same night sky, from a place where the light didn't quite reach. Winter has a way of making New York feel larger than life and smaller than the people walking through it. The glass towers rose like mirrors, reflecting every hurried breath, every soul still trying to prove something to the world. That night, Dr. Nyla Jefferson stepped out of the United Nations headquarters, the beacon of equity award in her hand. Inside, the hall had been bright with applause and camera flashes. Outside, the city was hushed, and snow had begun to fall soft, deliberate, each flake landing on her black coat, melting slowly into the wool, as if the sky itself was whispering, "That's enough, Nyla. You've done enough." A cluster of reporters waited near the steps, lights flickering against the night. "Dr. Jefferson," one called out, "how does it feel to be called a global symbol of justice and equality?" Nyla smiled faintly. "I'm not a symbol," she said. "I'm just here to remind the world we can do better." Then she turned and walked away, leaving behind microphones, questions, and the restless hum of attention. Her car slid quietly through Lexington Avenue, the lights of the city gleaming off the wet asphalt. The award rested on her lap, heavy not with pride, but with memory. Every meeting where she had been doubted, every moment she had smiled instead of speaking. At a red light on 47th Street, she turned her head toward the window and froze. Across the street, in the lobby of a brightly lit office building, a man was bending down, mopping the floor. Reflected in the glass was a face she had not seen in years. Ethan Vance. Time had weathered him, the gray in his hair, the slight stoop of his shoulders, the way his uniform hung loose, like it no longer fit the man he used to be. A faded plastic badge glinted under the light Vance maintenance staff. He didn't see her at first. He worked with quiet focus, careful and deliberate, the same hands that once handed her a plastic cup instead of crystal. Neela watched in silence through the car window. There was no anger in her gaze, no triumph, only the stillness that comes when a wound has finally closed. It felt like watching an old film, colors dimmed, emotions intact. Then Ethan looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, the city disappeared. There were no memories of humiliation or regret, only two people who had collided at their worst, now standing, or rather, staring across two panes of glass, separated by a life's worth of choices. Ethan froze, the mop suspended midair. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but the air between them was already full of words that no longer needed speaking. Neela simply nodded, a small, steady nod, the kind that says, "I see you, and I have already forgiven you." Then she turned away. No backward glance, no need for closure, because sometimes endings don't need sound, only peace. Inside the lobby, Ethan stayed still, watching as she disappeared into the snow. He felt no anger, no shame, only a quiet ache, vast and hollow, like realizing he had lived all these years just to arrive at this single moment. And in that moment, he learned his final lesson. When someone is no longer important enough to hate, that is when you have truly paid the price. The wind outside grew stronger. Ethan turned back to his work, pushing the mop slowly across the floor, each motion wiping away a trace of the past, late but honest. Somewhere deep within him, something eased, not because he had been forgiven, but because at last he had learned how to forgive himself. As the car glided toward Park Avenue, Neela looked out the window. The skyline shimmered tall, cold, and beautiful. She rested a hand over the award in her lap, then exhaled softly. The trophy sparkled in the low light, but she knew the truest moment of justice tonight had happened not on a stage, but in that silent exchange through a pane of glass, because not every form of justice arrives with applause. Sometimes it comes as an unspoken understanding between two people who once stood on opposite sides of prejudice. As snow thickened, she smiled to herself and whispered, "Maybe this is what justice really means, not to make someone kneel, but to make them look within." Morning came clear over New York. After a night of snowfall, sunlight spilled gently between the glass towers, glinting off the windows of the Langston Hotel, where Dr. Neela Jefferson sat by the window, tea cooling on the table beside her. Below, Park Avenue moved with its quiet rhythm taxis, steam rising from grates, the city returning to itself. She opened her old silver laptop, the same one that had followed her from boardrooms to late nights building Helix Core. Her inbox overflowed with congratulations ministers, CEOs, journalists, even a few former rivals now turned allies. She didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she clicked open another folder. Project Lumen, Impact Report. The document was thick with data and testimonials. 12 international airlines now partnered in the unconscious bias training she had once imagined as a single, small fix. At the top of the list was Astra Airlines, the same company that had once humiliated her, now leading a campaign titled Equality at 30,000 Feet. The report began with a quote, one of hers that someone had written down years ago. True power isn't in a first-class seat. It's in the ability to turn an insult into reform. She read slowly. Not to edit, but to remember, because it had all started with something so small a plastic cup instead of crystal. And yet, from that small moment, an entire system had been forced to look in the mirror. She remembered once telling Charles Green, Astra's CEO, I don't want to fire one man. I want to save a company from the blindness it can't see. He had nodded, and since then, Astra had rewritten everything hiring, training, service standards. Every employee from pilots to gate staff now completed empathy flight training, learning to recognize the quiet biases that shape their instincts before they turn into action. 3 years passed. Astra Airlines was named Pioneer of Ethical Culture in Aviation by the Atlantic Review. No one remembered the name Ethan Vance, but everyone knew the story of the black woman who changed an industry through grace instead of anger. In one interview, a reporter asked, Do you ever feel sorry for him, the man who lost everything? Nyla had answered simply, I never wanted him to lose anything. I only wanted him to see. That line spread across social media. Someone wrote, That's not vengeance. That's enlightenment. Another replied, Her justice doesn't shout. It silences you out of respect. Hody, that same day, in a training room inside Astra's New York office, an instructor played a video dramatization of the incident on flight AA709. It was now part of the company's curriculum, a case study in microaggression. On screen, a reenactment of Ethan's fateful line. Passengers in this cabin usually don't cause trouble. A young trainee raised a hand. Where is that guy now? The instructor smiled gently. That's not the point. The point is what we learned from him. That afternoon, Nyla walked through Bryant Park. Children threw snowballs, couples shared hot coffee. An old man read a newspaper under the winter sun. A middle-aged couple recognized her and approached, shyly. Excuse us, Dr. Jefferson, the woman said. Your story. It changed how we teach our kids. Nyla smiled, nodded. She never knew what to say in moments like this, because she didn't see herself as a hero. To her, it was never about winning or losing. It was about a world that had lost its way learning again how to see each other as human. She sat on a bench, watching pigeons scatter and return. For a moment, she thought of that flight, the cold cabin, the judgment in the air, the plastic cup, all of it, the seed of everything that followed. She whispered, barely audible, No one is born knowing respect, but anyone can learn it if someone's willing to see them with kindness. That night, at Helix Corps' office in Los Angeles, her young team worked late, editing a new campaign serve fare, not fancy. The tagline was simple, but it spread quickly a reminder to industries everywhere. Don't serve to impress, serve to uplift. When the team showed her the final cut, Nyla only said, Fairness isn't a slogan. It's the way we act when no one's watching. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered across the glass, reflecting two worlds, the one that once was, and the one now becoming. A world once built on appearance, and another beginning to rise built on awareness. And in the space between them, Nyla stood not as a victor, but as a witness. The next morning, she opened an email from a Harvard student. I'm writing a paper on moral power. My professor told us to find a living example. I chose you. You've shown me that real power doesn't belong to the loudest voice, but to the one who keeps their dignity when the world tries to take it. Nyla read the message slowly, then smiled. She closed her laptop and looked out at the brightening sky. Somewhere above the clouds, a plane glided east, its wings catching the morning sun. And in that reflection of silver and light, she saw herself the woman once dismissed in first class, now the one quietly rewriting what power means for the world. Late afternoon. The headquarters of Helix Core Energy in Los Angeles was bathed in amber light. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched toward the horizon, a slow river of gold inching west into the sea. In the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor, Dr. Nyla Jefferson sat across from a small team of documentary filmmakers. They were preparing a feature called Silent Justice, the Nyla Jefferson story. Director Richard Coleman leaned forward. If there's one idea, he asked, one theme you'd want the audience to carry long after the credits fade, what would it be? Nyla was quiet for a few seconds. She looked out toward the Santa Monica skyline, where the last light of day slipped beneath the clouds. Then, softly, she answered, not my story, but the story of a world learning to wake up to the things it once called normal. The room fell still. She turned back. Her eyes calmed the kind of calm that comes after years of walking through fire, without losing grace. Please, she continued, don't tell it like a hero's tale. Tell it as a human one about a black woman who once sat in first class, met with doubt, and chose not to shout back. Because sometimes, silence is the only way to stay whole. Richard nodded, jotting notes, but there was emotion in his eyes that no pen could capture. A young screenwriter, Sophie Turner, hesitated, then asked, if you could go back, if you'd reacted differently that day, do you think things would have turned out another way? Nyla smiled faintly. Of course. I'm human, not holy. There was a moment I wanted to throw that cup, to shout, to make him feel small, but I realized anger would only prove the world right about me. Silence made it look at itself. On the wall hung a photograph. Justice Malcolm Drake shaking Nyla's hand at the launch of Project Lumen. Beneath it, a small plaque read, Justice doesn't need a voice. It just needs to stand in the right place. Nyla looked at it, her tone turning almost to a whisper. Judge Drake, he proved what I believe, that real justice isn't born of authority, but awareness. He didn't defend me with words, but with a look, one that made others recognize their own wrong. Another producer asked, and Helena Marquez, do you still keep in touch yet? Nyla nodded. She's now Astra's global training director. She told me the most important thing she learned wasn't how to apologize, but when to say sorry. Sometimes one person doing the right thing is enough to make a system change course. She paused, poured herself some water. Ethan Vance is part of this story, too. Don't vilify him. He wasn't cruel, only blind in a well-lit room. Without him, none of this would have been seen. No one spoke. Silence filled the room, the kind that comes not from discomfort, but reverence. Outside, the light dimmed. Evening descended over the city like a curtain falling after the final act. Nyla stood and looked down at Los Angeles glittering beneath her feet. She knew her story no longer belonged to her alone. It had become a mirror for an age trying to remember its conscience. On his notepad, Richard wrote the film's central note, "Central theme subtle prejudice among the powerful, where politeness masks bias. Character arcs, Neela Jefferson intelligence, dignity, and the quiet force of restraint. Ethan Vance privilege, blindness, and the cost of arrogance. Justice Drake, witness of conscience, voice of the awakening system. Helena Marquez, professional ethics and courage to correct what's broken. Lena Jefferson, the still heart, the place where strength becomes peace. Message justice isn't complete when the guilty are punished, but when the once silenced become the ones who set the standards of the world. When the meeting ended, everyone left except Neela. She remained by the window, watching the city's lights gather like constellations below. Her phone buzzed a message from Lena. "Hey sis, just saw the early poster. The studio wants to title it, 'The Woman Who Rewrote the Rules.' I think it fits you." Neela smiled, typing back, "No, Lena. I didn't rewrite the rules. I just reminded them of the one that was always there, that every person is born equal." She set the phone down. A faint breeze moved the curtain. For the first time in years, her heart felt perfectly still. No triumph, no resentment. Only balance, the quiet equilibrium she'd been chasing all her life. The next morning, at the United Nations headquarters, workers hung a new banner above the main hall. "Equality isn't a speech, it's a standard." Beneath it, engraved in silver, was a small line, "Dr. Neela Jefferson." It wasn't large. It didn't need to be, because everyone who passed beneath it paused, remembering the woman who once chose silence, and, in doing so, made the whole world listen. The story of Dr. Neela Jefferson is not just a reflection on racial prejudice. It's a portrait of the quiet strength that comes from composure and intelligence. She didn't choose anger. She chose action. She didn't seek revenge. She reformed the very system that once wronged her, so that no one else would have to endure the same. In a world where many believe that power and loud voices bring justice, Neela proved the opposite. True justice doesn't need to shout. It reveals itself in how we act when we're disrespected, and in the change we inspire afterward. You may not be a CEO. You may not own billions, but each of us has the chance to do what's right in a single, respectful glance, a kind gesture, or a fair word spoken when silence would be easier. Because sometimes, the way we respond to injustice decides which world we truly belong to, the world of prejudice, or the world of humanity. Thank you for staying with us through the end of today's story. Flight attendant, embarrassed black CEO in first class minutes later. His career is over. If you believe that respect and fairness are the true foundations of a civilized society, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread stories that celebrate the power of ethics and human awareness. See you in the next video, where every story reflects a quiet kind of justice that still matters in our time.